Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA Podcast, What Works Wednesday edition. We have a special guest today in Ash Murphy, who is both a phenomenal financial planner in his own right, a great mountain biker, as I learned firsthand in Colorado, but also the founder of the Global Financial Planning Institute. And Ash, I actually have to share a story that I don't think I've ever relayed. I mentioned it briefly in my book, but it wasn't until I met you and I said, Ash, what do? You said, I work with Australian expats, that the importance of having a well-defined niche, like, just sank into my soul permanently, because forevermore I thought, oh, Australian expats, Ash Murphy. In fact, I ended up referring a client to you because as soon as somebody told me they were an Australian expat, your name immediately came to my mind crystal clear. And I said, there's a guy you have to talk to, Ash Murphy. So with that introduction, Ash Murphy.
Wow. How do I? Thank you, man. That's awesome. And I do appreciate the references. It is interesting to think about. Like, maybe we don't want to go down this rabbit hole. Maybe we do, but it's like, I don't think a niche is a niche necessarily. Like, I think there's something in it. Like, there's something between, one that's more catchy, more nichey, versus others.
For sure. And there's there's a line about, is your niche just because it's catchy or just because you think it's profitable versus it's really your expertise? I think there's a lot of lip service paid to niches, and the niche is like, where can I make the most money? That's my niche.
Yeah. And you just have to wonder how much currency you're going to get with some of these things. I was on a webinar last week where one of the hosts got all excited about someone who typed in and said, my niche is dinks that are into dogs, like dual income, no kids that are into dogs. I'm like,
yeah,
really? Are these people going to be like, you're my planner because you're into dogs? And
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I've wondered that too. Like, just because it's weird doesn't mean that someone's going to resonate with that, right? I will highlight yours. Like, Australian expats make sense. One, because you're Australian. But like, oh, somebody understands my unique need. I don't know that I would correlate owning a dog with, that's who I should see for financial advice. Like, I've never sought out a doctor. Let's use a different example. The acupuncturist I go to, she also does CrossFit. So I think, great, you understand how I live my life. You have that same sickness, let's call it. You get that I'm not going to rest. You get that I'm not going to take time off for injury. Perfect. You're the person I want to see. If she told me that she also likes banana smoothies, that's not going to move the needle for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, great, wonderful, but yeah, I don't really care. Yeah, that could be your access point, I suppose, to a niche. Like, if you were hanging out with dinks, double income, no kid, then that could be your access point. But yeah, I don't get it. But then the dogs, Matt, you don't get it, apparently. It's like, no. They're not dogs.
I'm neither a dink nor do I have dogs. So yeah, maybe this does resonate, Ash, and you and I are missing the mark because it doesn't speak to us. It's the perfect niche.
Right, exactly. It's actually totally intended.
Well, stepping off of our soapbox, not only do you have a tightly defined niche, you've actually sort of made this niche or variation of your niche like kind of like your life's mission in founding the Global Financial Planning Institute. And you're doing a conference, I believe, January 14th to 16th, to talk and work specifically with those advisors that have, we call multinational, international clients, which is a very technical niche to have.
It is a very technical niche, and this came about from years and years. I was a Knowledge Circle host in the FPA. They've got a Knowledge Circle called International and Cross Border. And I was in there, and it was back in 2010. I got into the business, and there wasn't a single event that happened where the words international, global, cross border, if they were in it, I was there. I was absolutely networking like crazy. And so I was pretty green, didn't know what I didn't know. But eventually I witnessed this dynamic unfolding over years. And I'm sure you've seen the same thing, man, in different niches that you've observed and advisors you've coached on, where you'll get people that may have the occasional client who necessitate answers from this group. And then they write in and they say, hey, listen, I've got a client who blah, blah, blah. And after a few years, eventually I knew that there were advisors who served that niche and who responded every time there was, hey, I'm looking for a referral. Like, if I want to give away a client, bang, they would appear. And then when someone would write in and say, hey, can someone just help me out understanding everything there is to know about British ISAs and how I roll that into It's like, hold on a minute. So someone spent tens of thousands of hours and dollars developing this niche, understanding this, educating themselves, networking, and then some random person is just going to come along on a knowledge circle and be like, oh yeah, let me take an hour, maybe 2 or 3, and I'll write this how-to that you can follow, and maybe you can even make this your niche too, and we can be competitors. And that'll be awesome. Like, let's do that. And so I observe this, and I'm like, this makes no sense. Like, we're asking people to basically give away the secret sauce to their practice. And so this went on for years and years, and eventually I said, this is a market failure. We need to correct it. And that's where the impetus for the GFP Institute came from. And by the way, the GFP Institute was officially born on that mountain biking trip that you mentioned earlier. That was when I finally declared to you guys, I was like, I'm going to do this. This is real. This is happening. And 3 months later, the first masterclass was launched.
Yeah, boy, that's amazing. I do remember that. It was also when the COVID crisis kicked off. So we'll leave that to the side. But that was this. By the way, speaks to the power of masterminds. It was you and I, and it was Stephen, and it was Ben Nelson, and a couple of us, Benjamin Brandt, who pushed his mountain bike the whole way. And
we discovered the things that you of e-mountain bikes. Turns out they're not quite as helpful as
they're not legal everywhere. But yeah, the things, the inspiration that comes out of those, the excitement, the passion, the courage of like, hey, I can't tell my buddies about this any longer unless I take action on them. Right. There's really a lot to be said for that.
Totally. Accountability. It's like, I'm going to look like a fool if in a year or two I've gotten all excited and told them, hey, this is what I'm doing, and then get together and it's like, this guy just is a bunch of hot air and doesn't do anything.
I love that. I want to go back to your comments about people posting on forums expecting to learn the entire depth of the thing. I sort of try to relate this to other professions. Like, imagine going on a forum and like a pilot's post like, hey, I'm flying a 747 for the first time. Like, do you guys have any tips on how to do that? Or a doctor's like, hey, listen, I've been doing cardiology, but I thought I'd try a knee replacement. Any tips on that? Right? Just the idea that a niche is so simple that all you need to do is read a blog post and somehow you're qualified. That's a scary thought.
I just want to say this before. Intelligent people can arrive at different conclusions, but I think this is a function of a lack of regulation in the field that we're in. And that is, if there was in fact regulation that said, you know what, unlike dentists or doctors or whoever else you want to use there, you can simply take an advisor that's outside of your niche and try and flub your way through. You know what? Because these advisors, they've got mortgages to pay, they've got food to put on the table, and they don't really care. No one's going to come after them with a stick. Client probably will never know. What's the harm? And that's basically what happens. So when on occasion someone says, so who's your biggest competitor? I say, aside from indifference, which is a mighty competitor.
I was going to say indifference would have been my first,
We'll never overcome that one, I don't think. But the second one is actually every other undifferentiated advisor. That would be number 2. Number 3, I can list exactly who those firms are that focus on the international cross-border, but it's indifference, every other financial advisor that isn't following their CFP code of conduct. And then there's the actual competitors, the ones that are doing similar things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to, and it's easy to get lost on this, I think, that there's this critical importance to have a deep bench of technical knowledge, but you also have to have this ability to communicate it because, Ash, to your point, a lot of our industry, for worse or worse, goes to the people that are the most persuasive communicators. So to your example, like your number 2 competitor is not someone who can match your technical expertise or exceed it. Your number 2 competitor is somebody who talks faster and smoother than you do. And so for those of us with a deep technical expertise, with a passion for delivering massive value to our niche, you've got to be good at communicating. You've got to be good at articulating to prospective clients, listen, all I do is this niche. There will be lots of people who also do this. There will be lots of people who say they know how to do this. Here are a couple of questions to ask them to make sure that they, in fact, know what they're doing.
Right. You were the one that gave me this tip years ago, probably 5 years ago. You said, and it's really speaks to up-leveling your practice. You said, record yourself and listen to yourself. Like, be your own harshest critic. Because do you think the NFL players go out there and they're like, hey, let's just figure out this play on the fly? We're all excellent. We've been training for years. Let's just do it, guys. Like, no, of course they don't. And it's the same with describing certain concepts, working on your metaphors and succinct ways of communicating important points. Because I think that's, not to get all philosophical on you, Matt, but I'd say that's been one of the primary intellectual developments that I feel that's occurred over the last couple of years, is really getting a deep appreciation for language and understanding how certain words resonate with people, and using good, comfortable, accessible language that people understand, that fits with them, is incredibly important. I mean, that was my problem from the outset. I'm a very analytical kind of guy, and I was like, if only I can just explain this concept. So, would you believe it didn't actually work? Yeah.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, right, we're working with human beings. And while maybe their finances should be a top priority, often it's priority number 10 or 11, and they've got 100 other things they're thinking of, and they're solving for convenience. And I don't mean any of these with disrespect. That's just how I am. Like, when I'm looking for professional services, half of what I'm looking for is convenience. Is this guy or gal easy to understand? Yes, I want them to have a deep bench of technical knowledge, but Ash, to your point, most consumers assume incorrectly that financial services, like medicine, if someone holds themselves out to be an orthopedic surgeon, they have a background in orthopedic surgery, and that is not at all the case in financial services, right? Like, anybody can say they're an expert at anything.
Right. Well, the CFP board is putting out an effort right now to try. Have you heard about this one? They're trying to protect the use of the phrase financial advisor. So they're trying to
I think the FPA is like financial planner, financial something. Yeah, they're trying to capture title protection.
That's interesting, but that hasn't happened and probably won't go anywhere anyway. But you're absolutely right. That's exactly it. So what can we do other than just be better professionals? That's really the only answer.
Well, I want to highlight something that you're working on, right? So with the Global Financial Planning Institute, GFP, you've got a conference coming up January 14th to 16th. One of the things we can do as professionals that are committed to delivering massive value is associating with other planners that have that level of commitment, especially inside of niches or area of expertise, where we can say, perfect, how do you deal with competitor number 2, right? People claiming to do what we do. What do you say when someone says, well, I could just Google how to deal with international tax law, or they ran into XYZ advisor that's just pitching them annuity? Like, how do you handle that? I found no better platform than events like what you're putting together, Ash, where we can say, great, Ash, like, let's sit down, let's have a beer. Tell me, how did you handle this situation?
Totally. I mean, that's it, isn't it? It's like the first couple of years at a conference, it's technical knowledge, and you're more excited to discover this new Roth IRA rollover strategy or whatever. But then you get some maturity, some runs on the board, and it is exactly that. It's the water cooler, bar conversation at these conferences that really can change your perspective. Absolutely. And that's the other thing, is that this is an unfortunate side effect perhaps of COVID, is there's been, I think mostly the move online and to virtual has been good, but my worry is that for a younger generation, they're going to fail to appreciate the value of relationships, and that you still do need to get together in person. And as I think back, the deepest friendships that I've made in the financial advisory world over the past dozen years have been from 2 conferences / programs. One was the one that you're involved with, so Perfect REA, and the other one was the FPA's young. Oh gosh, what do they call it? They have this. Oh yeah,
the Next Gen program.
Next Gen, that's right. And it was a 3-day, essentially just a booze fest. It was like spring break, basically, but littered with presentations throughout. But talk about a way to get to know someone, rather than just sit there, shut up, listen to someone at the front of the room talk at you, and then they'll read questions from their iPad. Like, you don't even hear anyone's voice anymore. So that's an unfortunate side effect, I think. So we need to actively break out of that and get out, meet new people, and put ourselves out there.
We do, for sure. We do for sure. And I want to tie this back to kind of a rant you and I were at the beginning of people that are sort of just like dropping into forums, trying to pick everybody's brain. And our aversion to that is not saying that we're not of abundance mindset. Like Ash, you and I have talked on technical subjects. And when that relationship has been established at a conference, at an event, and we say, great, I know this is a reciprocal. This is like, I know that I will help you out and you will help me out. That's perfect. Like I'm all day abundance mentality. It's when somebody comes in and says, hey, listen, Ash, give me everything you know. I will do nothing in return. That's not a reciprocal. Like I don't have any obligation there. In fact, it's, as you point out, it's not in my best interest. If it's reciprocal, it is, because I know it's going to get paid back.
Right. And, it's funny. So tomorrow at exactly this time, I've got a call booked with an old friend that I knew from San Francisco who was so helpful to me when I was getting started. And he wrote me an email and he actually just said straight up, hey, I want to pick your brains about a client situation. And I'm like, happy to help, dude. Like, there's that return, that paying it back, paying it forward kind of mentality.
Well, Ash, speaking about the paying it back, paying it forward, tell us a little bit more about your event in January that you're doing, about the type of advisor that's a good fit for. Like, who is that really designed for?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So we've got this conference coming up. Two tracks going on the content of the conference. So there's practice management and technical. So for any given session, you could sit in either one. And it's really pitched at the advisor who's working or interested in working with clients whose financial lives cross borders. There's some 10 million individuals in the US who are there legally, who are born abroad. So there's that number right there. There's also tens of millions of others in the US on various types of visas or permanent residence. So there is a lot of mobility, and the world's opening up yet again. I don't think that trend is going to reverse. And there's just a lot to know in working with these clients. It's we do go down that rabbit hole a little bit that we were speaking about at the beginning there, Matt. But with international and cross-border, it's fundamental. Like the actual fact-finding process is different. Like literally different. Oh, yeah. It's not like college planning where you ask, one or two questions, like where do you want to go to college? What have you got saved?
Yeah. What state do you live in? What state will you go to college in? Yeah, no, you've got this infinite possibilities.
Where were you born? What's your work history involved so far? What countries? Where do you have assets? In which countries? Where do you see yourself retiring to? And then we've got to think about, okay, what are the tax implications of that? Can we get these funds from one country to another? How do we do that efficiently? And put together a whole retirement income program from multiple sources and pensions in different countries and moving retirement accounts and all the rest of it. So it gets very technical very quickly. But
that's incredibly deep. So it's definitely not one, and I don't want to keep picking on this, but it's not one that you could just sort of pick up, right? And I almost want to put this out as a caution flag for advisors. We talked about niches early on. Part of having a niche is knowing, hey, I can't go there. I think about the client that I referred to you, Ash, and I can tell I knew right away that he was international, but at first I thought, this is a perfect client. Like, this fits perfectly in my niche. This is exactly what I like to do. This is like, but then they said, oh, well, actually we I won't give details as personal, but like, hey, we're in the United States on a work visa and we're going to retire to a different country. And for one second, Ash, I thought, I bet I could probably figure this out. But that's not the kind of advice I want to give. I don't want to give like, hey, I could probably figure this out. One, I'm not sure I could. But two, like, that's malpractice, right? Like, that's not what this client wants. They want somebody who says like, oh yeah, I've dealt with this. Here's exactly what we need to do. Maybe there's some nuanced things we need to figure out. Maybe I need to call in some other experts, but I get the core of the issue.
Yeah, and yet again, I that's another one of these eternal debts of gratitude that I have to you. So we're counting up the eternal debts of gratitude. so he's a great client, still is a client, and it's such a great story, that one. So he'd lived in the US by that point for about 15 years, and you were wise, and as it turns out, it was a great client to refer on just for the results that we were able to get. Insofar as when we started working with him, we made him aware that the US has, not many advisors know this is one of the other reasons why this is such a technical niche. The US actually has an exit tax. And if that guy had stayed living in the US for another year beyond when we first engaged him, then he would have been subject to an exit tax, and he would have owed
Wow.
millions of dollars to the US at the time that he expatriated. As it happens, he fell in love with New Zealand. The family is Australian, but they fell in love with New Zealand. Lo and behold, turns out New Zealand has a very generous program to attract high net worth individuals. The guy was able to get a result, and I should say, I firmly believe we need to do the best job that we can within the rules, within the limits of the law, but get the best result for our client. And the result we ended up getting was just unbelievable. So we put together a team. We found a fiduciary-based advisor in New Zealand. We found him a CPA there, tax attorney in the US. So we covered off all of our bases. I don't know if I ever told you this, if we ever circled back, on all the details, because it unfolded over a course of many years.
Yes.
But he was able to get, what was it? He had like $5 million in IPO stock from a certain company up in, where you used to live in the Northwest. And he was able to move to New Zealand and pay no capital gains on that at all. So just an extraordinary result.
Yeah. No. When you explained that to me, that was, I was elated, right? I was elated that you were able to, and your team were able to do that. But at the same point, it was like you've had those like near death experiences. It occurred to me, I thought, if I had tried to figure this one out, if I had thought I could, and taken a year to figure it out, I would have potentially cost that client millions of dollars that could not be unwound. And so it was one of those like where like your life flashes before your eyes, like, man, I almost really screwed this up had I stepped outside of my lane. So I'm glad that it was a win-win, especially for the client. I know for you and I, Ash, that's the number one concern. But some of that all circles back to that story that I started with, right? When you told me, hey, my name's Ash Murphy and I work with Australian expats, like that perfectly cemented. I've met thousands of advisors and they've told me like, oh, I do financial planning. I do comprehensive financial planning. I do comprehensive proprietary. I don't remember any of them. But Australian expats cemented in my brain. And so I appreciate what you've done for that client. I appreciate what you're doing for the industry and your passion here.
I have a theory here, Matt, and an invitation.
Yeah.
And the theory is it's cemented in your brain because secretly you're just dying to come to Australia. That's what it is. That's what it is.
I am dying to come to Australia. I need to make that happen. I'll have to put that on my 2023 travel list. Trip to Australia. We'll have to do like a mastermind there.
Well, I'm coming back in August, so you got a tour guide until then. But I'll be back at other times as well.
I love that. Well, Ash, we could spend all day chatting about this, but I want to make sure that we get wrapped up because I know we both have other things to do. What are a couple of action items in addition to checking out the Global Financial Planning Institute and signing up for your conference January 14th to 16th? What are some action items for advisors listening that you would say, hey, here's something you could take away and work on right now?
Yeah, I would say the thing that they should think about, if this is a niche that is appealing to them, then they probably need to get the base education in that area. That would be the masterclass. We run a 10-session masterclass that goes through a bunch of subject matter experts, tax attorneys, international CPAs, international wealth advisors, insurance agents that work in a cross-border domain. And that's really going to lay the foundation for what you need to know. And beyond that, I think the next decision is, are you going to work on a country-by-country basis, or are you going to be a generalist? Are you moving into the U.S. or out of the U.S.? You could be going anywhere. I'm going to limit my advice if I take that route versus being a specialist in a particular country where you can work on both sides and really have an extraordinary situation like what I've had, for the past 18 months living in Australia and coming back and forth from the US.
I love it. One other action item I would give to all of our advisors listening, there's endless talk in our industry about picking a niche. I would say it's equally critical to establish who you should not be working with. So in this example, I talk about dodging a bullet here that saved the client a ton of money. In my mind, it was very clear, like that person's outside of my expertise. So know what you're good at. Whoever you're going to work with, get really good at that person. Also know where you should not be working. Ash, thank you so much for your time today. It's always great to catch up with you. I look forward to our next adventure. We'll have to go mountain biking again sometime. And to all of our listeners, happy planning.
Indeed. Thanks, Matt. This is fantastic.